welcome, Jen Stevens. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thank you for having me here today, Paul.
I am very excited you are here because it's that time of year, isn't it, when people are thinking, I really need to sort my health out. And
Oh, yeah.
fasting pops up, but there's a lot of information about it. It gets confusing. And I intermittent fast, and again, it's been a bit of a minefield. And I thought, I'm going to have to reach out to an expert. Who's the best person? Who's got a New York best-selling book called Fast, Feast, and Repeat I could ask to come onto the show?
Well, I am here to help you with your questions as
Yes.
well. That's really exciting, Paul. So you're right. There is so much conflicting information out there.
Mm,
And that is why it is so hard for so many people to know what to do, what should you be consuming while fasting, what's allowed, what
mm.
is not, what's the best fasting approach, all of that. And that's why I started writing books in 2016 and podcasting in 2017 and leading groups in 2015. I'm a school teacher and by
Wow.
trade. That's what I'm
Yeah.
trained to do. And I love to teach people things.
Mm. Well, it shows. It really does show. So is that how did you get into this? So you were a school teacher by trade, and then
Right.
what happened for you to become this sort of global, expert on fasting that people can turn to and relate to? What happened there?
Well, I was a school teacher, elementary, 28 years before I retired, but I also was a serial dieter and a yo-yoer. And I basically started, being diet focused from an early age. My mother was a dance teacher,
Mm.
and I grew up as a dancer. I was better at tap and jazz, not ballet. That was not for me. But we were all very body conscious in the dance studio, and my mother was, and so I always was very focused on, we have to keep our bodies a certain way. And I think a lot of girls, men
Mm.
even too, we can relate to the whole idea of there's a certain way we're supposed to look. So even before I needed to diet, I was like diet focused. And when I went off to college, gained the freshman 15 like everybody else. I wasn't overweight, but I started, well, I got to lose this weight, came
Hmm.
back calorie counting. That's what everybody was doing. It was the 80s. And so that started the cycle of yo-yo. And, over the years when you're doing the yo-yo dieting, you lose the weight, you gain back a little bit more than you lost. So you're higher than you started. Lose the
Yeah,
weight,
yeah.
right? So that just kept going over and over again. And after I had kids, it got even harder after I had my two boys. And basically, I yo-yoed myself up to being obese. I was 210 pounds. And
Wow. Okay.
yeah, and I tried literally everything. I was successful. In the meantime, I got a doctorate in gifted education. I was teaching adults and, an online
Mm.
university and doing lots and lots of things and could not get my weight under control. And finally, I found intermittent fasting along the way. I actually, funny story, found it because, of course, I looked at everything. 2009 to 2014, I was aware of it, but the information was, not really solid at
Mm.
that time. And so I dabbled in intermittent fasting, which I can explain why that is like the worst thing to do. Why dabbling in intermittent
Okay.
fasting is so hard. But
Uh-oh.
so I never really made it stick. It wasn't until 2014 when I was desperate that I finally was like, this is the time. And that's the time it finally
Mm.
stuck for me. I started in 2014. I have now been through 10 holiday seasons as an intermittent faster. I lost over 80 pounds. And this is the only time in my life I've maintained a weight loss. And since it's been, 10 holiday seasons, I'd say it's stuck.
Yeah.
it's
Amazing.
it's
Amazing.
it's my way of life now, right? It's a lifestyle. And that was, the struggle in 2009 to 2014.
Mm.
I didn't understand that it was a lifestyle. Because really, think about every diet we ever did. You did it a little while, then you quit doing it. You stopped doing
Mm.
it for vacation or on the weekend. You would go back to it every Monday, whatever. Well, intermittent fasting is actually, you become metabolically flexible when you give your body time to adapt, and you have to give your body time for it to adapt like that. So if you're always just dabbling in it, you never get to the part where it's easy. So that was the big aha moment, was understanding that, oh, you can't just dabble in it and go here and there. It really is something you need to teach your body how to do. And when you're metabolically adapted and metabolically flexible, then it is suddenly not something that feels so hard.
Yeah. And so obviously it sounds like quite a journey for you, which is it has
Yeah.
led you to where you are today. And obviously that's something that a lot of people can relate to. So there are obviously questions that people are listening who are listening to this are thinking, well, what exactly is intermittent fasting? So let's get the basics right. Because there's so many
Okay.
myths and weird, ideas about what this is all about. And that's what I would like to clarify with you. So let's get what is intermittent
Perfect.
fasting? Let's go.
Well, I want to put out there, I did not invent fasting, obviously, right? I'm the teacher sharing all the best information with you that I've been
Yeah,
able to pull together from multiple sources. That's what teachers do. A math
yeah.
teacher didn't create the math, she's sharing the math. So that is what I do. I have combed all the resources out there and pulled together what works, and also compiled all the research together. So when you hear the word fasting, you might think about, fasted blood work, or, like Jesus fasted 40 days and 40 nights, or you think of monks, or you think it sounds miserable. But really, every single person that's alive fasts every day while you're sleeping.
Ah,
You wake up,
yeah.
you might have to get fasted blood work sometime, and you just don't eat till after the blood work, right? Because we all have periods of our day when we're not eating, we're fasting. So if you follow intermittent fasting, then you are just extending the period of your day when you're fasting. And it's almost like you flip flop it. The period of time that most people in today's world are not eating is limited to just like while they're asleep. Maybe they might have like 8 hours
Yeah.
where they're not eating. With intermittent fasting, you have a longer period of the day where you're fasting and not eating, and you just shrink that eating window. Now, that is just one type of intermittent fasting. That's the most popular. That's what most people do. You could also call it time restricted eating. That actually might, I wish that was the name that had stuck, because it just seems less harsh. Fasting
Yeah.
sounds hard. Time restricted eating sounds cheerful. And easier, right? Because you don't hear the word
Yeah.
fasting. But of course, you really do have to understand fasting is one state that the body is in. It's the opposite of the fed state. So our bodies are meant to go back and forth between the fasted state and the fed state. We're not supposed to be in the fed state all the time. We're also not supposed to be in the fasted state all the time. So we just intermittently have periods of time when we're fasting and periods of time when we are feasting.
Brilliant.
Did
So
that
we
help? Is that
intermittent. Yeah, it did. It
pretty
did.
easy?
Excellent. So intermittent fasting, we do that anyway because we
Mhm.
sleep, and it's about
Right.
extending the period of time that you would, remain unfed. Um, what's
Right.
a good amount of time? So people listen to what's a good amount of time for someone to increase their, time when they're not eating.
That's a great question. And that's going to be very individual. It depends on
Mm.
many things: your metabolic health, your goals. Do you have a lot of excess fat? How long have you had that excess fat? How long have you been metabolically unhealthy? Or if you are already metabolically healthy and you just want to, improve your health outcomes long term. So understanding why you want to be an intermittent faster and what your goals are, that's a very important first step. I actually have a new
Mm.
book. I'm going to show it to you right now because I'm so excited. It just
Awesome.
came out last week, 28-day fast start day
Ah,
by day.
lovely.
And
Okay.
yeah, it's a companion to Fast Feast Repeat. So
Okay.
you need both of them. This is the one that if you really want me to like walk you through the first 28 days, this is the one. But before
Perfect.
someone even starts, I have like a quiz in there where you can figure out what would be right for you. Whether you need to really ease in, whether you're someone who needs to
Mm.
rip off the Band-Aid, or whether you're kind of in the middle. So let's imagine you're somebody, you don't need to lose weight. You're not doing intermittent fasting because you want to lose weight. You're doing it because of the health benefits. I like to call it the health plan with the side effect of weight loss. And my husband is one of those people that does intermittent fasting solely for the health benefits. He never needed to lose a pound. He's like lanky and slim and still fit into the pants that he wore when we got married in 1991, right? This many years later, never had trouble with weight gain. So he does a loose 16-8. And what that means is he fasts for about 16 hours and his eating
Mhm.
window is about 8 hours. And that's a really nice rhythm for someone who's in it for the health benefits. You might have a little bit of time during the
Mm,
day when you're tapping into a little stored fat right towards the end of your fast, and then you're right back in the fed state when you start eating. Most people accomplish that by like skipping breakfast, and then you
yeah.
just start eating at lunchtime. So, once you get used to it, not on day one, but once your body's adapted and you're used to skipping that breakfast, it's easy peasy. Like, I can't imagine having breakfast in the morning. It feels weird to me now to think of that. It's just not what my body, I mean, I've had a morning breakfast here and there on a vacation or at a hotel or somewhere special, but it just doesn't, it's not part of my normal routine. Oh, on the flip side, if there's someone who starting off like I was when I started, I was 210 pounds. I'm 5'5". I needed to lose a great deal of fat. 16.8, while that might be a great beginning place for me easing in, I needed a longer period of the time for fat burning. I had a lot of fuel stored on my body that my body could
Okay.
access when I was fasting, and fasting clean, which I can explain in a few minutes. That's really the game changer. But for me, a 19.5 approach was kind of my weight loss sweet spot. That looks like 19 hours of fasting or so every day and an eating window of about 5 hours a day. And that gave me time to nourish my body well in that 5 hour window, but also to tap into my stored fat for fuel. Because if you're not giving your body time to need to tap into the fat, like if you're putting in enough fuel, your body's not going to burn your stored
Mm,
fuel. So you have to
mm.
balance out and say, well, I got to give my body time to burn that fat. So fasting is great for that. And we find that based on some research that I've seen where they put people on a 72-hour fast and looked at what was happening with their fat burning. Fat burning ramped up around like hour 18, and it really ramped up from 18 to 24. Now that doesn't mean everybody needs to fast,
Okay.
longer than longer than that, but every day, that period of time from like 18 to 19 hours, that's just a little bit of extra fat burning in there, and you know that you're getting in that fuel that you want to burn. Did that help answer your question? There's not really a
It,
one
it,
size fits all. You just have
it,
to figure it out.
yeah, no, it really did. It really did. And what I was thinking about was, and I'm sure people are wondering, is how did you handle that? Because obviously that's quite a big jump from, say, your husband's from 16.8 to 19.5. So what was that like for you when you did that? Were you hangry? Were you struggling with
Oh, in the beginning?
yeah, what was it? Yeah, what did you go through? Because the people are listening to this going,
Well,
I'd love to do that, but have I got the willpower to do that?
you do have it. And again, like I said,
Mm,
y'all are so lucky because I have been, like I said, doing this since 2014. I've literally read everything, and I have led thousands of people. I had Facebook communities for a while. I no longer run
mm,
Facebook communities. I have a private community now. But like right this minute, I'm leading, thousands of people through a 28-day fast start in my private community. So I've done the hard work for you and figuring out, what you
mm,
need to do to ease yourself in and what to expect. But back in 2014, I had no idea what I was doing. So um, back in those days, we just pretty much everything you read about fasting of any type pretty much said, oh, fasting works because you're eating fewer calories. And that's the only reason. And it helps you to have a window of time to eat fewer calories. That's what we thought because that's what was pretty much out there. And over time, of course, research has shown, and I've learned from reading lots and lots of science that there's a lot more going on in our bodies than just, we are able to
mm,
eat fewer calories in our eating window. Our bodies are a lot more complicated than just a math formula of calories in, calories out. The actual period of time that we're fasting and that we're fasting clean has benefits. It lowers our insulin levels, which lets us tap into our fat stores more. And it also helps us, like I said, burn and tap into those fat stores like we couldn't when we were eating those frequent small meals. All sorts of benefits there. And because we're well fueled from our fat, our metabolisms don't need to slow. But backing up to 2014 when I started, you said, wasn't that hard for me? Yes, because, I talked about how from 2009 to 2014, I would dabble. I didn't understand the metabolic processes that had to go on for me to be fat adapted and really able to tap into my stored fat for fuel. But just coincidence, luck, I don't know what would
mm.
have it. The summer of 2014, before I started doing intermittent fasting, the keto diet was really, really popular at that time. Now, I am not a keto dieter. I eat carbs. I actually feel my best if I'm more like a whole food, plant-based dish kind of eating. But back in
Okay.
2014, keto was like all over the place. And so I was like, you know what? I can do this. So I did keto for the entire summer of 2014. And I did it perfectly because I was like, I started joining Facebook groups and they taught you how to track your macros. And if you weren't losing weight, just keto harder, more fat.
Okay.
And anyway, I was getting into ketosis. I didn't lose any weight, none. I
What?
lost no weight.
Really?
Um, I didn't lose any weight on keto, and I also felt
Yeah.
terrible the whole time. Now, was I getting into ketosis? Yes. I had a breathalyzer. It was a ketone breathalyzer, and it was way back in the day, so you had to plug it in, let it charge. Once it was charged, you blew into it, and it would show that you were producing ketones in your breath, or that you were producing ketones, they were coming out in your breath. So I knew I was producing ketones. Well, now I understand I was making lots of ketones from all the fat I was consuming, and none of it
Oh.
was coming from my stored fat. So I was in
No.
ketosis all the time, but I was eating a ton of fat. I didn't lose any fat because I was eating so much fat. But I was sick of it because I didn't feel good. I felt lethargic. I just, that wasn't right for me. My body doesn't handle that much fat well.
Mm.
So I thought back to what I had read before, things like the carbohydrate addicts diet, and they had you did low carb all day, and then you had a reward meal at the end of the day. That was one of the diets, and
Okay.
it could be anything. It didn't have to be low carb. And I'm like, that sounds a lot better than low carb all the time. I could, just go back to the low carbohydrate addicts diet and have my reward meal. And then I'm like, but wait a minute, I also remember fasting. And, there was a program, Dr. Bert Hearing wrote a book about Fast 5. That was what he called it, with a 19-hour fast, 5-hour window. And I'm like, I could kind of just do that, fast all day, and then have the reward meal. And let's see how that goes. Well,
Mm.
now I understand why it was so easy to start fasting, because I was already fat adapted. My body had already made that metabolic switch to burning fat for fuel. And so I added carbs back immediately, went to a 5-hour eating window, and I didn't stop. I was fat adapted. But here's what was crazy for me at the time. I didn't
Mm.
understand. Now I do. I had my breath ketone meter, and I can remember one day I fasted all day until, I opened my window in the afternoon, and I had a cheeseburger and fries, not a low carb meal. And then I was like, later, I guess it was like the next day, I'm blowing into my ketone meter, and I'm like, how am I back in ketosis after having a burger and fries? Because I didn't understand that we go into ketosis when we're fasting. And that's when we're burning our own fat for fuel. So now, of course, we understand it. Once I read Dr. Mark Mattson had a journal article called Flipping the Metabolic Switch, where he explains how fasting gets us into ketosis and when that happens and how, then I'm like, well, now it all makes sense. So because I had become fat adapted with keto, even though I didn't lose any weight and I felt terrible, my body was ready to be successful with fasting, even though I added all the carbs back. And so I steadily lost the weight till it was all gone. And I've been maintaining it ever since. After I added carbs back in, I never stopped eating them. And so now I eat all the foods. I'm a happy omnivore with a focus on, real foods
Yeah.
as I can. I'm
Um,
clean-ish. I have a book named Cleanish. So that's how I describe my eating.
yeah, that I recognize the title. And just for listeners, can you just explain what ketosis is and what a ketone is?
Yes. Ketosis is when I want you to think of your liver as a storage tank. Now, our liver does a zillion things. It is not just a
Yeah.
storage tank, but I want you to think of your liver as a storage tank holding something called glycogen. Glycogen's not only in your liver, it's also in your muscles, but your liver has glycogen in it. So when you're not eating, or during the day at any time, your liver can pump out some of that glycogen to keep your blood sugar, because our blood sugar needs to stay within certain levels. We know that. If it goes too low, that's not good. If it goes too high, that's not good. So our liver can pump out some glycogen as needed. If the liver doesn't have enough glycogen, if you're not eating and there's no fuel coming in, then your body's like, ooh, we gotta fuel the brain. The brain normally runs on glucose. We got to fuel the brain somehow. So the process of ketosis kicks in. Your body takes stored fat and produces ketones. So the fat's fueling your body is converting the
Mhm.
fat into ketones. That gives you great mental clarity, and it's a fuel source for your body. So we're not designed just to only be sugar burners. We're designed to be metabolically flexible. When we're eating, we can run on the foods that are coming in, and then our bodies can switch fuel sources as needed. So that's one of the most important parts of giving your body time to adapt, and why it's not always easy day one. Your liver's full of glycogen, you're using that up. As the tank starts to get low, your body is not good at flipping that metabolic switch yet. You have to build up to that. But once that happens, then your body can dip in and out of whatever fuel source is available, and you're metabolically flexible. Did that help?
Brilliant. Yeah, absolutely.
Good.
Absolutely. Okay. So, what's you talk about the other health benefits of fasting. I don't need to really lose weight, but I am absolutely
Right.
fascinated by the other health benefits, which your husband obviously
Right.
is obviously into as well. So, what else? Why is fasting good for us? What else does it do?
So many reasons. So many reasons. First of all, fasting has been shown to lower inflammation. And again, just like,
Mm,
everything. We need inflammation if we have an injury, or there's a place for inflammation. It's part of our body's healing
yeah.
processes, but we don't want to have excess inflammation. And most people in the modern world are running around in a very inflammatory state. So fasting is anti-inflammatory, so it lowers that state to the level that is healthy instead of that unhealthy high level that we're used to. So that's just one thing. It also is connected with something called autophagy. Now, have you heard of autophagy, Paul?
I have heard of autophagy. If I can say it, autophagy. Yes, I have.
Right?
But for listeners, tell me what it means.
I'll explain it. Okay.
Yeah,
Autophagy
yeah.
was not a word that people in the modern world had heard, just normal people walking around had never heard of it. Scientists, I'm sure, heard of it. But in 2016, all that changed. The Nobel Prize in Medicine in 2016 was awarded to a Japanese researcher who was studying autophagy and the amazing, how that helps our bodies, how it's basically our bodies, recycling and upcycling system.
Mm,
And it's the way our bodies clean up the junky mess going on, when no food is coming in. So it's linked to fasting. So while we're fasting, autophagy is upregulated. Now, we all have autophagy, whether you're fasting or not fasting, we all have it. But as we get older, autophagy gets downregulated. Our bodies kind of wear out, get tired, can't do as much as they used to could do. But fasting upregulates autophagy. So that is very promising for longevity because, decreased autophagy is linked to all sorts of problems, whereas keeping the levels high, that would be something we would want to see for increased
mm,
longevity and health as we age. So when we are fasting and when we're fasting clean, our body has nothing new coming in, right? So we already talked about how we're using the glycogen from our liver, we're using our stored fat, but our body also has to rebuild and repair things. So how's it going to rebuild and repair if nothing new is coming in? And that's also why some people think that when you're fasting, your body's just going to use up all your muscle tissue and like you'll waste away to nothing. Well, I have not wasted away to nothing. My body has not used up all my muscle tissue. And that's because when we're going through increased autophagy or we're experiencing that, our body can recycle those old junky proteins, old cell parts, even like scar tissue, weird stuff. So your body is recycling the junky parts and using what's already there and
right.
making new things out of what's on hand. Just like you would do if your pantry was bare or you only had like a few things stored away, you would make do with what you had. That's what our bodies do.
Mm.
And it's a really important part of the healing and repair process.
And actually, I'm really glad that you mentioned about the muscle side of things, because when I was researching intermittent fasting, one of the things I was worried about was, I kept reading
Mhm.
that any type of calorie reduction would result in muscle mass lost, which is, as I'm an athlete, that in itself is something I was like, oh no, what do I do in regards to that? And you're saying that doesn't really happen?
Well, let me just give you an example. Do you know Herschel
Mm.
Walker? Do you familiar with
No, no,
him?
no, no,
He's
don't know.
He's I'm from the American South, and he was a football
Okay,
player at the University of Georgia, and
okay,
he very successful. Went on, I think he did some kind of martial arts when he was older, but he was like an amazing, successful football player. Well, when years ago it came out, there was a video people were circulating. Herschel Walker eats one meal a day. And he always
what?
has since he
Okay.
was a teenager. So,
Wow.
yes, yes. It was like
Okay.
anybody could search. It's probably still there. If you go to YouTube and search Herschel Walker, one meal a day. And so early on in my fasting journey, I was aware that there were people such as Herschel Walker who were muscular and fit. And he was a
Ah,
top
okay.
athlete. And he naturally was he didn't call it intermittent fasting, and he actually was kind of apologetic because he was like, I don't know if this is really good for you, but it's what I do. But he's so strong. He's got very, very
Yeah.
great muscle mass. But I also very early in my fasting journey, before it stuck, I'm talking in the 2009 to 2014 years when I was not a successful faster, there was someone writing about fasting named Brad Pilon, and he was a bodybuilder, and he had a program called Eat Stop Eat, and he was, I mean, he was like the bodybuilder you would imagine. He was ripped. And so, there are definitely examples of people out there who are fasting and also building huge amounts of muscle. So you can just look at them and think, well, are they
Yeah.
outliers? Well, luckily I have a fasting community with thousands and
Yeah.
thousands of people. And one thing that we have found almost universally as people lose weight, we call it body recomposition. I mean, I didn't make that term up, it's a real term, but body recomposition is like as you're losing fat, but maintaining or building muscle, you have body recomposition. Now, the fat doesn't turn to muscle. No, that's
Mm.
not true. That's not what's happening. Sometimes people will say, "Oh, your fat turned to muscle." No, fat does not turn to muscle, but the two processes are happening. You're losing fat and building muscle. And so, thanks to body recomposition, we have people in our community who will, we've got a lot of diet history. A lot of us, we've had the clothes we've saved for decades. Like I still have a pair of shorts that I wore in the 1990s, right? I still have those shorts, and I can put them on and see how they fit me. And I have the same waist size now that I had when it was before I had children in the 1990s.
Wow.
This is before I was, struggling and obese. And I'm actually slimmer through the hips and thighs than I was at
Mm.
that time. But we see people they find that they are smaller at a heavier weight on the scale than in the past. Like they might have a pair of jeans that are size 6, for example, and they're like, I
Mm.
last wore these size 6 jeans, this exact pair of jeans, when I weighed, I'm just going to throw out a number, 140 pounds, but they fit me today and I weigh 160. How is it possible that my 160-pound body is fitting into these jeans that fit me when I weighed 140? They're the same exact jeans. I saved
Mm.
them. And that's because they've lost fat and maintained or built muscle.
Yeah.
So we see that all the time in our community. So, I mean, is that a scientific study? No, that's anecdotal evidence. But,
Mm.
when you understand the theories behind fasting clean and tapping into your fat stores for fuel, and the fact that your body would not burn your muscle mass if it could get your fat. I mean, what would your body rather burn? Your muscle tissue or
Yeah.
fat that it's stored there for you to get to? It doesn't make any sense. Jason Fung, who is also a pioneer in introducing the world to intermittent fasting, and he has a lot of blog posts, videos, his book, The Obesity Code. He has a great analogy. If it was really cold and the power was out, you needed to start a fire in your house for warmth. Would
Mm.
you chop up your sofa, or would you go out to the wood pile and get some wood and burn that? Now, if the wood
Oh,
pile was iced over and you couldn't get to it, if the wood
yeah,
pile
yeah.
was, if you couldn't get to it, you might have to chop up the sofa so you don't die. That's like low calorie diet, your body burning the muscle mass. A typical low calorie diet, you can't get to your stored fat very well because of the problems with the high insulin and the eating all the time and
Mm.
the low calorie diet. But now suddenly we don't have to chop up the sofa. There's the firewood. We can get to it.
I think that's a brilliant analogy. I think it does. It really sort of puts my mind at rest when
Good.
it comes to what happens with intermittent fasting. Would it impact muscle mass? And also,
Now, can I talk
I
about the
think,
clean fast and real quick? Can I talk about the clean fast? Because
yeah.
that's the difference.
I think that was one of my next questions, because it's something that
Okay.
keeps being mentioned, and I'm wondering what people think about, besides other health benefits. What is clean fasting? What does that look like? Because
Well,
again,
that
there's
terminology, I did create the terminology, the clean fast, and it came out of our Facebook groups in 2017 is when we started using the term clean fast in my Facebook group. And it was after I read the obesity code. And suddenly I understood about insulin. And insulin was like the missing piece. And Jason Fung taught us in the obesity code that insulin is anti-lipolytic, meaning anti-fat burning. And when you have high levels of insulin, your body really can't get to your fat stores very well, because I mean, it is true that insulin is a storage hormone. So what makes us have high levels of insulin? Well, eating, because our bodies release insulin in response to food coming in, but also Dr. Jason Fung taught me about something called the cephalic phase insulin response. And that is when your brain thinks food is coming in, especially when your brain thinks that something sugary or sweet is coming in. And so he explained, for example, like blew my mind. I took a screenshot and I saved it that day when I was reading his book. He explained that stevia, for example, which is 0 calories, and we're like, yeah, you can have 0 calories, or when you're just trapped in the calories in, calories out mindset.
Yeah.
Stevia, according to Jason Fung in the obesity code, stevia raised insulin levels higher than table sugar.
What?
So somebody's going,
Yikes.
somebody's going along. It's in the obesity code. Somebody's going along and they are drinking, like I was drinking Zevia soda at that time, 0 calorie, sweetened with stevia. I was putting stevia in my coffee every day. And so would I have been better off to put in table sugar? I don't know, but let's understand what the cephalic phase insulin response is.
Yeah.
So it's really interesting. They did some studies with rodents, and I can't remember if it was rats or mice. I'm just going to say rats. So whichever it was, we'll just say rats. So they took the little rats and they painted their oral cavity with an artificial sweetener, 0 calorie artificial sweetener. And then those little rat brains were like, ooh, something sweet's coming in. Their little rat pancreas pumped out some insulin just in response to the taste of that sweetness. 0 calories, taste of the sweetness, cephalic phase insulin response. Cephalic is brain. Wow. So they went on with the experiment. This is where it gets wild. They cut the nerve from the tongue to the brain on these poor little rats. And they repeated the experiment. No insulin response. The rats no longer could taste the sweetness. So there was no insulin response. So as soon as I read that, I was like, well, okay, I understand now. Having that cephalic phase insulin response, drinking a diet soda all day or putting artificial sweeteners in my coffee or drinking fruit flavor herbal tea, and my brain thinks fruit is coming in. Because why do we need insulin in response to something sweet? Let's think about what insulin does. If I were to go eat an apple, my brain's like, oh, fruit, sweet. As your body breaks down that apple, glucose is going to be released. And so to prepare for the increase in glucose that's coming in from that sweet thing you ate, the pancreas needs to release more insulin in response to that. It's getting ready. But when you're having a 0 calorie diet soda, your brain doesn't understand. Your brain just connects sweetness to glucose is coming in. So we hadn't caught up to biologically to 0 calorie sweeteners. The brain doesn't understand that at all. And so you might hear things, and it's really funny whenever you do. People will be like, this is the one sweetener that doesn't raise insulin. And I'm like, how would your brain know that one sweetener is not? So I would not go with any of that. You avoid sweetness while you're fasting. So that is a very important part of the clean fast. We want to keep insulin low. That's fasting goal number 1. Fasting goal 2 is we want to tap into our stored fat for fuel. Remember the story that I told about how I was doing keto all those months in the summer and lost 0 pounds? I was burning fat, all the fat that I was taking in. So what we don't want to do is take in fat or any other fuel source during the fast. So you don't want to put butter in your coffee or oil in your coffee or any of that. Because would you rather burn the fat from your coffee cup or the fat that's stored on your body? I
Oh,
know
I was
the
going to
answer
ask you
for
about
me.
MC. Yeah, I was going to ask you about
Yeah.
MCT oil. You're saying no.
No. I mean, think about it. Would you rather burn
Damn
the
it.
MCT oil from your coffee cup or the oil from your body? And there's
Yeah.
there's some, people saying, "Well, hey, the MCT oil raises your metabolism." But do you really think it's going to
Mm,
raise your metabolism to the point that it's higher than the amount of the oil you just took in? Because oil is very calorically dense, and your body is going to create lots of ketones from that MCT oil. But our goal is not just to have ketones. Our goal is to create them from the stored fat. It's the process that our body has to go
okay.
through. So if you're taking on lots of oil, your body does not need to burn your stored fat. Sure, you might have great mental clarity, but it's
Mm.
coming from the oil in your cup, not from fat burning
All right, I should
in your
take that
body,
out of my
right?
coffee in the morning first thing.
Take it out, Paul.
It's
And
gone.
you might notice a transition. Like, listen, you might notice
Mm,
that you feel a little mentally foggy for a few days if you're used to that.
mm.
Your body's got to make that transition. I'm not going to say our bodies are lazy because that sounds bad, but instead I'll say our bodies are efficient. And your body is not going to flip the metabolic switch to burning your own fat if it doesn't have to.
No, I get it. I'm glad
Yeah.
I'm glad you brought it up. I'm glad you brought it up. So
But the
clean
third thing,
fasting.
I got
Yeah,
so excited about that. There's
yeah,
one more thing. The third fasting goal is to have that increased autophagy that I was talking about. So we
yeah.
avoid all sources of protein during the fast. So you don't want to have all those, protein supplements that people think they need to have morning, noon, and night. Save those for your eating window. You don't want to have bone broth because protein stops autophagy. So, you just have to remember what period of the day are you in. If you're in the fasted state, that's not the fed state. You want to use what your body already has on
Mhm.
hand. If
Yeah.
you are in the fed state and you're eating, that's when you put in your protein sources. Our bodies don't need all the protein like right immediately just before or just after we work out. It has to do with your intake over like that 24-hour period.
Okay. Okay. So just
So,
to clarify something, so
okay.
during the fasting period,
Hmm.
what can you have?
Good
Are you
question.
avoiding? Yeah. So you've got a fasted period, and then you've got your eating window. Um, so just yes, a little bit of clarification between the two. What was it? What can we do? What can we
Okay.
can't we do?
Okay, so during the fast, we know what we
Mm,
don't want to do. We don't want to have an insulin response. We don't want to take in fat. We don't want to take in protein. What can you
yeah.
have? Well, plain
Yeah.
water is always good. I've got mine right here. Plain
Yeah.
water.
Yeah.
Um,
Lovely.
Nothing added for flavor. Because again, the lemon, the lime, the flavor enhancers, all of that your brain's going to be like, ooh, fruit's coming in. So you don't want to have anything with those fruity or food flavors. Apple cider vinegar, no. Keep that all for your eating window. So plain water,
Mhm.
nothing added for flavor. You can also have black coffee. Now, people say, well, wait a minute, you just told us to avoid flavor. Well, the difference is coffee has a bitter flavor profile, and a bitter
Mhm.
flavor profile does not lead to an insulin response.
Ah,
So the
nice.
the bitter flavor profile of black coffee, don't have like flavored
Mm.
coffee. Don't put the sweeteners in it. It just needs to be black coffee. And for anybody who's listening that's like, all right, I'm out. I got to have my little bit of whatever. I promise you, your taste buds adapt very, very, very quickly.
They do.
I used to have what I like to, call my hot milkshake. I was a latte girl. I put my sweetener in it. It was a hot milkshake. And now I drink black coffee. And if I can do it, you can. Your taste buds will adapt
Mm.
in 1 week, maybe 2 weeks. And so
Mm.
you can do it. If I can do it, you can do it. So you can find people who are like, oh, that little splash of cream doesn't make any difference. Yes, it does. That little bit of nut milk, that little bit of nut milk is going to make you starving. It's going to make it hard. If you're only
Ah,
looking at it from calories in, calories out, you will think, surely that can't make a difference. But when you look at it as to what signals it's sending to your body and what you're actually taking in and what you're trying to accomplish in the fasted state, that little tiny drip of whatever you put in there is going to make a difference for how you feel. You're going to feel so much better
mm.
without it. And you just hold your nose and drink it black until suddenly you no longer have to hold your nose. You're adapted to it. It makes all the difference. In Fast Feast Repeat, I have something called the Clean Fast Challenge. Give it a month. Give yourself 1 month. Just say, okay, I'm going to do it Jen's way. I'm just going to stick to black coffee, plain tea, not herbal tea, but actual tea,
Mm.
black tea, green tea, real tea, nothing added, plain water, plain sparkling water, no flavors. Give it 1 month. You will not go back.
I love that. I love that. And so, so that sounds easy-ish. Any tips for anyone who's like, what do I do if I'm starving? What if my body is like craving that food? Is there anything that would make it a bit easier for anyone?
Well, that's a great question. You need to figure out, first of all, if you're in early
Mm,
days and you're not metabolically flexible, you're easing in. If you're
mm,
truly physically hungry in a different kind of way, if you're shaky, nauseous, that sort of thing, that's your body telling you to eat. You're working up to becoming an intermittent
mm,
faster in the early days. Once your body is metabolically flexible, you'll really know the times between, oh my gosh, I really have to eat, versus, oh, that's just a little stomach growling, that's just a mechanical action.
yeah.
The other kind of hunger is an emotional kind of hunger. And so many of us, I've really learned this talking to people on my podcast, Intermittent Fasting Stories. Have not really been an emotional eater, but a lot of people are. It is a very
Mm,
common struggle. I just ate too much because I like to eat. It wasn't emotional reasons. I wasn't the one that my mother was like, here, have a cookie, but a lot of us, that's how we did grow up. A lot of people were raised, if you were having a hard moment, food was what was soothed you. Either your parents gave it to
mm,
you when you were a kid, and that's what you started associating it with, or you learned to self-soothe with food. So it's one thing about fasting is, suddenly, if you've been a self-soother, or if you've been someone who turned to food emotionally, you might have to learn to feel your feelings differently, and that's where your
mm.
meditation can come in, Paul, and
Yeah,
having
yeah,
the
yeah.
whole mindset of understanding what's going on,
Mm,
because suddenly you realize, like, people are like, oh my gosh, I did not realize how, when I was having a hard moment, I went and poured another cup of coffee with creamer in it. And I mean, just think about how many, I mean, I know it's not calories in, calories out, but think about how many hundreds and hundreds of calories of creamer and the junk that's in there that people are consuming, and they don't even think about that every day
mm.
because they're emotionally getting that creaminess, that comfort. So suddenly you're drinking black coffee. Where's the comfort? And you have to
Yeah.
learn new ways of dealing with your stress, meditation, tapping. Are you a fan of tapping as well?
Yeah, it's not something that I do, but it's something I trained in a long time ago, but it's not something that I do now.
Okay.
But people do find
But you're
it very
familiar
useful
with it.
and very soothing.
Yeah.
Yeah, 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 it's very useful. And then, so when a person is moving into their feeding window, um, you
Yeah.
talked about they can eat protein then, and they can have sweet things then. Is that? But
Well, they could
are
have
we talking
anything then.
eating clean? Yeah, they can have anything. Is that
Well,
so? Is it better to eat
here's the
clean?
thing.
Yeah.
Well, okay, short answer,
Mm.
yes. Real
Yeah.
food is always going to be better for everybody. And the more research that comes out, whether you're talking to someone who's carnivore or vegan, if they're in the health space and they
Yeah.
understand nutrition, we know that if you're a vegan, whole food vegan is better. If you're a carnivore, we want to eat high
Mm.
quality meat. So, but omnivores in the middle, those of us who eat all the foods, the higher quality our food, the better. So many of the metabolic issues going on in today's world are related to ultra processed foods. And,
Mm.
those are those foods in the boxes and the pouches that wouldn't resemble food that people were eating hundreds of years ago. So real food is always going to be better for your body. Now, that being said, when I started as an intermittent faster, I was standard American diet. I wasn't any kind of clean eater at all. So I ate junk food, I ate fast food, and that was the main thing of what I ate. I was brought up eating those foods. My mother did the drive-throughs. She got me TV dinners. I don't know if you called them TV dinners where you were, but I
Yeah.
had, SpaghettiOs in a can. That is what I was raised eating. Chicken pot pie that was frozen, and then we didn't even have microwaves. You had to bake it in the oven. So I ate a lot of processed foods. My palate, however, changed over time, and it changed naturally. One thing about intermittent fasting is it helped me connect with my body's cues better. So
Mm.
suddenly I started wanting more vegetables. And I really think that black coffee helped open up my palate. And, suddenly I could tolerate the bitter flavor profile of vegetables that I used to be a picky eater. Now I'm not a picky eater. So I want people to start intermittent fasting right where they are. if you're currently eating the standard American diet, then start intermittent fasting and don't try to also change everything you're eating on day one. Over
Good advice, yeah.
time, yes, you can be mindful, but you want to become established with intermittent fasting before you start changing everything else up. Because if you try to do too much, you crash and burn and it's just not sustainable. Like if you're like,
Mm,
I'm going to do intermittent fasting and I'm going to turn whole food plant based and I'm going to never eat sugar again. I mean, that's too much to do at one time. You're not going to be
mm.
successful. So over time, your goal is to nourish your body well. And you'll realize like someone will open their window with something they used to love. Like maybe they used to love McDonald's drive through and they'll go through the McDonald's drive through and they'll be like, ooh, I feel terrible after eating that. And it wasn't even good. And that's where the
No,
power is because Jen didn't tell you you can't have McDonald's. Your body said that's not good. And so you're empowered to choose the foods that are delicious, that make you feel good. And you'll realize those foods that you thought you liked before suddenly are not as appealing. It feels magical when it starts to happen.
that is something I can relate to. I do remember
Mhm.
through intermittent fasting, suddenly it's almost like my taste buds changed, but also I just wasn't interested in junk food the way like my
Mhm.
stepson wants it or anything like that. It's I'll have something different, whereas I would have had the cheeseburger and the chips before.
Right.
Suddenly it was like, well, no, you can have that. I'm going to do something different for myself, and so things
You
do
don't want it.
drastically change. No, I just no
The
interest. It
first
just
time you
actually
don't
turns my
want it,
stomach
it feels
slightly.
yeah.
Yeah, you just think, oh no, I'm all right. Last question, just so quick. I know that we're running over time a little bit, but I wanted to ask you. A lot of people who exercise, I work out in an exercise community, and they worry about exercising in the mornings fasted, and
Mhm.
then not having food to recover afterwards. What would you advise for anyone who was exercising in the morning and worried about having to wait a few hours for their feeding window? Is it a myth?
You
Is
do
are they
not have to
okay?
recover. It is myth. It is myth. You
No?
do not have to
Okay, is it a myth?
recover right
Yeah.
after. Yes, that part is a myth. Now,
Okay.
when is the best time to work out? To me, the best time to work out is the time that is convenient when you will stick to it. I feel best doing all of my exertion and I don't go to the gym, but I do things like jump on a rebounder and do some arm weights kind of thing, or
Yeah.
maybe something on the you exercise video. But I do all that in the fasted state. When we've moved and
Yeah.
hauling boxes up and downstairs, I do all that fasted. And I feel great. Just anecdotally in the community, people share their experiences. And we had someone recently who was like, well, which should I do? And I'm like, I don't know, experiment and see. And she did. And so she found through her personal experiments that she had no difference in her capabilities whether she was fasted or fed. But somebody else might find the opposite to be true. They might find that they get a better workout in
Mm,
the fasted state and they prefer that. Somebody else might find they prefer to do it in the fed state. So it just depends on your goals, your body, what kind of
mm.
exercise you're doing. Make sure you're fat adapted first. During the first 28 days or
Yep.
when you're becoming adapted, that's not the time to draw big conclusions like, "Oh, I'm really tired. I must
Mm,
not be able to work out while fasted." You're not adapted yet. So that's why you can't. But once you're
mm.
adapted, you've also got glycogen stored in your muscles. You can get your fuel from that. And when you're fat adapted, there's so much more fuel there than you may be expecting. So experiment and see. Get fat adapted first, maybe take
Mm.
it a little easy while that's going on. And then there's no wrong answer to when you want to work out. But working out fasted is not a bad thing. A lot of people prefer it to working out in the fed state. And I'm one of those.
Yeah, I'm one of those. I can't imagine eating now. I actually really don't like it. I feel very heavy. But I do remember
Yeah,
worrying. This is a few years ago. I remember really
right.
worrying that I would suddenly crash and burn and I'd have no energy
Yeah.
whatsoever. And it would be terrible. And I remember my first ever gym class fasted. And I was like, oh, I'm actually all right. What was the fuss
Yeah,
about? It was
right.
just a trick of the mind, I felt.
It's true.
um,
Yeah.
Jen, it's been amazing talking to you. Thank you so much. I could talk for a couple of hours. There's so many questions I still haven't got through, but for people who do have questions, they're thinking this wasn't enough. Um, where can they reach you? Where can they find you and explore your content even further?
Awesome. Well, I showed you my new book that's out, 28-Day
Yeah,
Fast Start Day by Day. This is what you want to start. But you also need Fast Feast Repeat, because this book is a companion for this one. And I'm a teacher, so this one will send you to this one for a little deeper dive. And this has everything you need along the way. To
perfect.
find me and connect with me, go to jenstevens.com. Jen is Gin, Stevens with a PH, jenstevens.com. And you can connect with my community. It's a great place to be. And all my podcasts are linked from there, intermittent fasting stories, as well as the Fast Feast Repeat intermittent fasting for life podcast.
Amazing. It really is. I love your content, and I think it's so helpful
Thank
for
you.
anyone who's on a journey to not just lose weight, but to really think about their health in a different way. It really does have an impact on so many different levels. I know we didn't get to really cover that too much today, but I hope people get a taste of what it could do for
Mhm.
them, and what it, if they want to level up for 2024, this is a good place to start.
This is it. Yeah, this is the last thing you need to do.
I love that. Thank you very much for listening, everyone who's been with me today. I'll look forward to connecting with you in the very next episode.